Hi, it's Patrick Hutzel from IntensiveCareHotline.com, where we instantly improve the lives of families of critically ill patients in intensive care, so that you can have real power, real control, and so that you can influence decision making even if you're not a doctor or a nurse in intensive care. In last week's blog I showed you 5 reasons why you shouldn't trust the intensive care team blindly if your loved one is critically ill in intensive care. And if you haven't read, watched or listened to the update, you can check it out by clicking on this link below the video. In this week's blog I want to talk about the 5 reasons why you need to stop being intimidated by the intensive care team if your loved one is critically ill in intensive care. After having worked in intensive care for more than 15 years and after having worked with thousands of critically ill patients and their families, I have learned many valuable lessons, and some of those lessons are not always what you would expect. However, giving you crucial insight in the dynamics, the politics, the intrigue and the psychology that are at play in an intensive care unit is something we live and breathe at IntensiveCareHotline.com, because the well-being of our readers, their families and their critically ill patients are at the heart of our mission. Just as I have outlined and talked about the 3 most dangerous mistakes that you are making but you are unaware of if your loved one is a critically ill patient in intensive care in a previous blog, there are more other quite substantial reasons why you and your family need to question your approach towards the intensive care team that stop you from having power, control and influence whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care. I know that the overwhelming feeling of families who have a loved one critically ill in intensive care is that the perceived lack of control, the fear, the frustration, the struggle, the challenge and the perceived overwhelm lead you to feeling extremely vulnerable, especially since you know that the life or at least the future health of your critically ill loved one is in the hands of the doctors and the nurses in intensive care. And this can be a blessing if handled well and if you have the right advice and insider knowledge. Or it can be a curse if you are like most families of critically ill patients in intensive care who are intimidated by the intensive care team. And if you and your family are belonging to the majority of families in intensive care, you do feel intimidated by the intensive care team on a conscious or on a subconscious level. More importantly, there are 5 very distinct reasons why you need to stop being intimidated by the intensive care team. So let's get right into it. Number 1. Stop putting the doctors and the nurses on a pedestal and stop thinking that they are superior to you and your family. Most families of critically ill patients in intensive care will never have any influence, control or power over the destiny of their critically ill loved one because they are putting the intensive care team on a pedestal and they think that they are superior to them because they are doctors and nurses with degrees, so they automatically assume that they must be smart. By doing that, families of critically ill patients in intensive care hand over their power, control and influence on a platter. Stop doing that now and regain your control, power and influence. Stop thinking that the intensive care team is superior to you and your family. They are not. They are only superior to you and your family if you let them. So it's in your hands to regain power, influence and control by changing your thinking. Number 2. Stop thinking that the intensive care team always knows what they are doing. Whilst the intensive care team, generally speaking, are highly trained and highly skilled professionals, there is no reason why you should look at them like godlike creatures. That's clearly not what they are. They are human beings with their own virtues and also with their own faults. Therefore, just like in any other profession, they make mistakes, they make wrong assumptions, and they don't always know what they are doing. Therefore, you can't trust them blindly, and it's your responsibility to do as much of your own research as possible whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care. If you don't, you'll have no power, no control, and no influence, and if you do, you will have power, control, and influence. If you don't do your own research, you are at the mercy of the intensive care team, and if you do, you're not at the mercy of the intensive care team. Number 3. Stop thinking that the intensive care team always has the best interest of your critically ill loved one at heart. As I mentioned before, intensive care is a place full of politics, intrigue, difficult and often competing dynamics, difficult personalities, and if you fail to understand and if you fail to recognize the psychology behind an intensive care unit, you are absolutely powerless, you have no control, and you won't be able to influence any decision making whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care. Especially when it comes to difficult situations such as long-term stays in intensive care with uncertain outcomes, withdrawal of treatment, end-of-life situations, and anything that you think may involve drama and emotions, you and your family need to understand, recognize, and counteract any agenda that the intensive care team has that is not in the best interest of your critically ill loved one. For example, if your critically ill loved one has a severe head injury and he or she takes a long time to recover, the intensive care team may not want to invest the resources necessary to save your critically ill loved one's life, and the intensive care team may therefore position your critically ill loved one's prognosis and diagnosis in a negative light to try and convince you that any future treatment might not be in the best interest of your critically ill loved one, because they don't see your critically ill loved one's treatment as financially viable, or they see it as a burden to the ICU and their staff. Number 4. Stop thinking that the intensive care unit and the intensive care team don't have a hidden agenda. There are so many moving parts in an intensive care unit that it would be foolish for you to believe that the intensive care team doesn't have a hidden agenda. This is even more important for you to know if you and your family find yourself in a situation where the intensive care team is talking about things like withdrawal of treatment or withdrawal of life support, futility of treatment, uncertain future quality of life, no future quality of life. Now, I have touched on the financial viability of treating your critically ill loved one in number 3. And now I want to highlight that whenever the intensive care team doesn't want to invest the resources to get your critically ill loved one through their ordeal, they may position your critically ill loved one's prognosis and diagnosis as one with no future quality of life or uncertain future quality of life, or they may talk about futility of treatment. You need to have your answers ready and well thought out for the positioning of the intensive care team, because who is to quantify, qualify, or even judge quality of life? Quality of life is something measured by an individual and not by the intensive care team. If you feel intimidated by those statements by the intensive care team, you better have a strong mental positioning in place, because otherwise the intensive care team will walk all over you and your critically ill loved one. Number 5. You need to stop feeling intimidated by the intensive care team, because help is at hand. So far, very little emphasis, support and resources have been allocated towards genuine and real support for families of critically ill patients in intensive care. However, IntensiveCareHotline.com is taking a very different approach and is showing you the moving parts of an intensive care unit, and we are helping you to regain power, control and influence. And if you want to have power, control and influence whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care, and if you want to be perceived as strong, influential, impactful and knowledgeable by the intensive care team, and if you want to be in control of your and your critically ill loved one's destiny, and if you want to make an impact, download your free Instant Impact Report now by entering your email below. In your free Instant Impact Report, you learn how to speak the secret intensive care language, so that the doctors and the nurses know straight away that you are an insider and that you know and understand what's really happening in intensive care. In your free report, you'll also discover how to ask the doctors and the nurses the right questions, how to eliminate fear, frustration, stress, struggle and vulnerability. 5 killer tips and strategies helping you to get on the right path to control, power and influence in your situation. You will get behind the scenes insight so that you understand what's really happening in intensive care and how you need to manage doctors and nurses in intensive care. It's not what you think. With your free instant impact report, you'll also get 4 other free reports, and the reports you will be receiving are the 6 questions you need to ask the most senior doctor in intensive care, 10 things you didn't know doctors and nurses are talking about while you're not at the bedside with your loved one, the 7 answers to the 7 most frequently asked questions if your loved one is critically ill in intensive care, 9 myths of being a critically ill patient in intensive care. Thank you for tuning into this week's update, and I hope that this episode has helped you how you can change the intensive care team's perception about you, and I'll see you again in another update next week. Make sure you also check out our Your Questions Answered section for more tips and strategies, or send me an email to support@intensivecarehotline.com with your questions. This is Patrick Hutzel from intensivecarehotline.com, and I'll see you again next week with another update.